much longer he can go.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah. Okay. So let's listen to this guy.
One, this is not a 737 problem. It's a Boeing problem. And I know the FAA's gone in and they've done due diligence and inspections to assure that the door plugs of the 737 are installed properly and the fasteners are stored properly. But my concern is, what's the rest of the airplane? What's the rest of the condition of the airplane? And the reason my concern for that is back in 2012, Boeing started removing inspection operations off their jobs. So it left the mechanics to buy off their own work. So what we're seeing with the door plug blowout is what I've seen with the rest of the airplane, as far as jobs not being completed properly, inspection steps being removed, issues being ignored. My concerns are with the 737 and the 787, because those programs have really embraced the theory that quality is overhead and non-value added. So those two programs have really put a strong effort into removing quality from the process. When I first started working at Charleston, I was in charge with pushing back defects to our suppliers. And what that meant was I'd take a group of inspectors and actually go to the supplier and inspect their product before they sent it in. Well, I'd taken a team of 4 inspectors to Spirit Aerosystems to inspect the 41 section before they sent it to Charleston. And we found 300 defects. Some of them were significant that needed engineering intervention. When I returned to Charleston, my senior manager told me we had found too many defects and he was going to take the next trip. So the next trip he went on, he took 2 of my inspectors. And when they got back, they were given accolades for only finding 50 defects. So I pulled that inspector aside and I said, did Spirit really clean up their act that quick? That don't sound right. And she was mad. She said, no. Said the 2 inspectors were given 2 hours to inspect the whole 41 section and they were kicked off the airplane.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are inspectors, sort of.
Well, that sounds like a money thing, right? They're saying that quality is overhead. They're looking at
that's
profits.
First whistleblower statement was made in 2017, I think.
Yeah, he was, doing like a deposition or something the other day when he was found dead in his car in the parking lot of a hotel. So, but you said the profit thing there. So I mentioned the Comac C919, and that's the direct competitor, Chinese manufacturer, new Chinese manufacturer to the 737. Well, there's a Comac 929 as well, which is a direct competitor to the 777 and 787. And the 787 is the other one that you just mentioned. And so if we, I don't know if you've heard of degrowth. And degrowth is actually a model that kind of can avoid being communist. But I read this book called Marx and the Anthropocene by this Japanese Marxist named Kohei Saito, and it's called Toward the Idea of a Degrowth Communism. And it talks about how what we need to do is, and this matches the Marxists of the 60s, by the way, is that what capitalists need to do, Americans, capitalism needs to shrink. We produce too much stuff that nobody really needs. So what we need to do, well, I'll just tell you what Herbert Marcuse said in the 60s was socialism has the right ideology, but it can't produce. So we have to figure out how to make a productive socialism. And I'm arguing that's what happened in China. They figured out the code. Well, how? By opening up a kind of Potemkin market that the government really controls. Well, then on the other hand, he said, well, capitalism produces. His own words were it delivers the goods. However, it's not sustainable. It makes too much stuff, too much junk. And so what we need is a reduction in our standard of living, a reduction in our amount of stuff, a reduction in energy and everything in the West. And if you could somehow figure out how to make a more sustainable capitalism, then you're off to the races. So what I was saying earlier is that when Kissinger and Brzezinski and Deng and Chan and Rockefeller were meeting, they were erecting the idea of this productive socialism for China to take off with a Potemkin contained market. Meanwhile, eventually the West would have to degrow so that we could have a system that's not going to outstrip the world's resources. This is at a time when limits to growth from the Club of Rome was really big and really hot. Klaus Schwab platformed it at the World Economic Forum in 1973. These guys are still around. That Paul Ehrlich and his population bomb was like a big thing. And so these guys were thinking along these terms, and it was, how do we degrow the West? And so what I think we're looking at is, well, there's a Chinese manufacturer that can rise while the American manufacturer shrinks. America might not be able to make its own jets, but we can buy them from China, and China becomes more and more secure as the manufacturer from the world. Meanwhile, the Degrowth Initiative, there's this program, this research project that was called UK FIRES, FIRES, like fire, right? And this was Oxford University, Cambridge, the government, the British government. Like, this is serious. And so this thing that came out, published in 2019, was called Absolute Zero. It's not called Net Zero. It's Absolute Zero. And it says that net zero is not enough. We are not going to save the climate change problem if we only go for net zero carbon emissions. We have to go to absolute zero carbon emissions. And so it openly says, what are the initiatives? No new concrete production, no new steel manufacturing, no container shipping. I mean, you can actually look on the document and see it's like 0 by 2050. But it also says no fossil fuels and no air travel by 2050. 0, absolutely 0 air travel by 2050. And so how do you get to 0 air travel by 2050? How do you create a massive reduction? Well, what else is going on besides the Chinese market go up, Boeing look bad? Media, of course, is amplifying stories that are pretty routine. Little things go wrong with aircraft all the time. I've taken off a few times, a flapper or something gets stuck. We have to turn around and land, and they have to fix it. But this is national news when it happens. So they're creating this image that is really scary. But what are the airlines doing at the same time? What is the new aircraft? Have you heard of the Boom Supersonic? Made in Colorado? So it's like the new Concorde.
Right.
Well, you can't fly those over land. Those are transatlantic only, right? So the UK Fire thing actually says no domestic flights whatsoever, but international travel will be reserved. Well, turns out the Boom Supersonic is a Concorde replacement. It's really, really fuel efficient. It's really well designed. Not going to throw shade at it. So its operating costs are approximately similar to like a 777 or a 747, right, for the same distance. The Concorde was a disaster in terms of how inefficient